Hi guys. Since I screwed up, it sounded so bad, the soundtrack. I'm gonna try it again this week. Hold on. I hope that sounds better. Splish splash, I was taking a bath. It's Bobby Darin. All about a Saturday night. I love Bobby Darin. Thinking everything was alright. When I stepped out the tub and put my feet on the floor, I wrapped the towel around me and I opened the door. And in a splish splash, I jumped back in the bath. Well, I was out and know there was a party going on. I should just let that go. I should just shut up and let Bobby Darin sing. And I'm sure that idiots will tell me that. Okay, so that was Bobby Darin's Splish Splash, and this is the part two of the gratuitous soundtrack edition of the bathtub. And the premise is that if you like the Avengers movie, you've seen the Avengers movie. Every time it gets boring, they throw in a Bob Seger song. Bob Seger is responsible for more good movies than he ever knew that would be possible, and they just put in lots of good pop tunes. So I won't do it anymore, but I thought I'd try it a couple more times. Today we're going to talk briefly about a writer. As I told you, I'm going down memory lane in my old age, reading books I read when I was a kid. And one of the writers I used to like when I was like 15 was Bob Shaw. We have a guy out in Northern Ireland we hear from a lot, and Bob Shaw was probably the most famous Northern Ireland science fiction writer, next to James White, who was another science fiction writer about that period. And Bob Shaw was really good. I remember reading a lot of Bob Shaw books and enjoying them. I have never read his first novel, Night Walk, and I love this old cover. It's such a weird cover. It's like an alien head with a lot of other heads in it. I mean, I just think it's a beautiful books. And then the back's got that suit. Anyway, it's kind of these are beautiful old books. Anyway, I went back and read it. This is the period when every time you bought this science fiction book, it had this thing for the masterpieces of science fiction for 10 cents. You could join the science fiction book club, and they would send you they did do it too. They would send you like 10 fake hardcover books for like $1 or something, because they would want to get you on their mailing list. And then they would send you books forever and send you bills for them. I used to be terrified of going home because I thought I owed these people like my parents' house. So you never use those. Don't use this if you see this in an old book. Bob Shaw was he managed to live in Northern Ireland, and he somehow made his books internationally anonymous. So you never really knew he was in Northern Ireland. I don't recall him writing about anything that sounded like Belfast in his fiction, but he really knew how to tell a story. He kept close third-person point of view with his characters, so you're pretty much in the head of his characters throughout these novels. And he played some games. He had some really interesting ideas, and he's still a good read. He's a good thriller writer in a way, at a time when people like Larry Niven were becoming very famous. And he's sort of the same period as Samuel R. Delany, who was a little more literary, I guess, but kind of hard to follow. Silverberg and some of the really good science fiction of the 60s and 70s. Bob Shaw was writing it in Northern Ireland. He did really good jobs. And Night Walk is really worth checking out. The premise is we're on some planet far off, somewhere in the middle of the Milky Way's other galaxy, or really far away. And there's these portals. He has a lot of weird, clever ideas. They're too clever for me to follow, but there's some ways of using portals to go from one part of the universe, the galaxy, to another. And this guy's a spy, and he's trying to steal the coordinates for something. Anyway, he gets caught, and he's blinded. That's the most important part. All the rest is MacGuffin. He's blinded, and he becomes a prisoner on this alien prison. And he and another blind guy create a headset that allows him, even though he's blind, to link in with the eyes of other animals and other people. So that's what this weird picture. It's really very much a surreal or an impressionistic vision of what's happening in the book. Is this person is actually plugging into eyeballs all around him while he's escaping from this maximum security prison, which isn't very maximum security because the guy gets out after like 10 days, I think. But anyway, it's about his trip across, and there's lots of different ideas running through it. He's good at shifting the plot around, and he follows through on these kind of he comes up with kind of interesting kind of science fiction ideas, and he follows through with them. So I enjoyed that one. I went back a couple years ago. I went back and reread one. I think it's called 1,000,000 Tomorrows, which I didn't like as much. I remember reading that. Seeing that occasionally Shaw would get into chase narratives, which is my least favorite novel narrative, which is just the good guy is just being chased for 200 pages. And I think that's what happened in 1,000,000 Tomorrows, or whatever that was called. But he's best known, and he deserves to be best known, for a short story called Light of Other Days. And I don't have it in a collection, but Bob Shaw wrote a number of short stories, and his most famous story in the 60s was called Light of Other Days. And I still use that story when I'm teaching creative writing or short story writing, because it's a perfect little story. He's technically really good. He's a good sharp writer, and he's not flamboyant or sexy like some writers are. He's not like Harlan Ellison or Roger Zelazny or these writers of the time who are really stylistically sparkly. He's you don't really see what he's doing. I'll read the opening of Light of Other Days, and if you haven't read this short story, you really should read Light of Other Days. I'm sure it's free online. And the story starts like this. Leaving the village behind, we followed the heady sweeps of the road up into a land of slow glass. It's a great opening paragraph. I had never seen one of the farms before, and at first found them slightly eerie, an effect heightened by imagination and circumstance. The car's turbine was pulling smoothly and quietly in the damp air, so that we seemed to be carried over the convolutions of the road in a kind of supernatural silence. On our right, the mountains sifted down into an incredibly perfect valley of timeless pine, and everywhere stood the great frames of slow glass, drinking light. An occasional flash of afternoon sunlight on their wind racing created an illusion of movement, but in fact the frames were deserted. The rows of windows had been standing on the hillside for years, staring into the valley, and men only cleaned them in the middle of the night, when their human presence would not matter to the thirsty glass. I'll quite quickly tell you the premise is that they create these panes of glass which are so thick that it takes years for light to come through the glass. So that's the whole idea. So if you put this piece of glass out on a beautiful mountainside with a lovely view, the view comes through the glass, and you sell it after 7 or 8 years, and people can take that home, put it in their windows, and see a beautiful nature scenery coming through their window, even though they live in a horrible city, which most people do. It's a great little idea, and in this story, he just does a perfect job of making that a dramatic and emotional story. He's a good emotional writer, too. This is not I've never read this book. This is called Other Days, Other Eyes, and because that story was so famous, Shaw was commissioned to put together a book. And this is what you call a fix-up in a way. There's a novel, I think he wrote a novel that he inserted several stories with slow glass in them. And those are the types of books where a lot of science fiction writers had to do this in the 60s and 70s to make a living. And I'm not really interested in reading the whole book. But I really recommend Bob Shaw. And we'll do other books by him. Palace of Eternity, I remember liking. I really like The Two-Timers, really strange little book called The Two-Timers. Hopefully we'll talk about that soon. But for now, his very first novel, Night Walk, is well, first of all, you got to enjoy it with a cover like that. That's just such a cool cover. But it's worth checking out. All right, so that's for Bob Shaw, Northern Ireland's great, not sung enough science fiction writer. And again, I promise not to do this anymore, but I'm gonna see if I can close on another. Hold on. There we go. I'm putting this up near the speaker. It's not Tweety Bird, but he was the second best bathtub song to Tweety Bird. When I stepped out the tub, put my feet on the floor, I wrapped the towel around me and I opened the door, and in a splish splash, I jumped back in the bath. Well, I was out and know there was a party going on. There's a party going on. Okay, happy bathing. We'll see you next week.